speaking from my heart and sharing my journeys, the roles I have taken, and how all of that, how it has been. And I'm also going to ask that you also forgive me ahead of time. Let me ask your permission. I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. And all I am saying is my experience has been enabled by the Spirit of God. I am who I am because He enabled me. And so you may find instances where I make Bible references or where my faith also has enabled me to go through some of the challenges that I have been through in my 20 plus years of experiences. Let's deep dive into it. Having said all my thank yous and my openers and things that I believe is essential that I lay as some of the grounds. I would ask that you please take your pen, take down everything that you require, and as I share my experiences, please do not think twice. Where you feel a need, write out all your questions. I will be glad to take all the questions that we may have and share my own insights and thoughts into it. I think what is even most important is as I share these experiences that I drop some nuggets for you and things that you may relate with. So let's get into it. I was at LMA Petrochemicals in Port Harcourt then during my youth service, wherein I met two ladies, Ayodele Olojede. Ayodele she's had vast experiences, and she's now at she recently moved to Wema Bank and at DGM level, doing exceptional work. Prior to then, she was with Access Bank. And before Access Bank, she was with Sky Bank and started with Prudent Bank at the time. And I would mention why I am making reference to her. And then we had another friend, the three of us, Omome Oni. She's a medical doctor today in the US. But when the three of us met, we were just three young ladies. And we had an ambition. We just would talk about who we wanted to be. Aya wasn't so clear, if I recall. I wish she was here to tell her story. But Omome finished, she did biochemistry and she wanted to be a medical doctor. And she would say to herself, you know what, I really don't even know whether I can do this. But guess what? I would give it a try one day. My dream is to become a medical doctor. And I would say to them, I love working with people. I wasn't clear what HR was at the time, but my dream was to bring alignment between people dreams, who they can become, and where the organization wants to take them. And I would say it, and I'll say, look, I just want to enable people to fulfill that dream within the organizational context. And they would laugh at me. But then Ayo and I were business development officers, and I used to work with a lot of data because it was a lot in terms of research. And then Omome was always into testing because she was a biochemist and she was in another part of the plant, as it were. But three young ladies who would sit down, talk about our future, map things, and talk about our experiences. And one day, we used to do all our applications together, except for Omome, who was going in a different direction. I and I used to do all our applications together. And then one day, we got an invite to some consulting. I think it was Omolayole at the time that was handling it. It was somewhere in Ilupeju at the time And you know what? She wasn't invited. I was the one that was invited. And frankly, we went. So I told her to follow me. And in following me, we got there and we were gisting with, there were elderly men at the time, and we were having that conversation. And, I told them that, look, you're not going to interview me without interviewing this person. I mean, imagine that level of audacity. And that is my first point to you. You require a level of audacity in this HR profession. Audacity helps you to confront challenges. At that time, we were foolish young girls, but not so foolish in the end, because audacity enabled doors we never thought that would happen to us. And so be audacious in your dreams and in your talk as you move around in your profession. So the men were perplexed, but guess what? They said to themselves, what do we have to lose? And that exactly is what happened. It turned out that when we finished the interview, she was taken, I wasn't taken. And that's the second lesson for me in my journey. There are times that you are there as an HR professional to be the door opener for somebody else, doors that may have been shut to them. It doesn't make less of you. Actually, it shows the kind of person that you are and what you are made of. And so that's how we began the journey. But what then happened to me at the time, as it were, and at the time, don't forget that the banks were the big things. It was the boom of the time. I had my dad's senior brother who at the time just retired. He used to be in Securities and Exchange Commission, and he was a director at Corporate Affairs Commission, but he had his own practice, Steolac Financing. And so I started to work with him in Steolac, but he wanted me to move quickly also into the bigger space rather than the consulting. And that takes me to another point for you as an HR professional. You may be working in a small company today. That company gives you opportunity for skills you would never imagine. Just as the Bible says, do not despise the stay of small beginnings. Then I felt I was nothing and I wasn't doing too much, because I would sit down, I would research all the papers. He had speaking engagements, and I needed knowledge about the capital market. I needed knowledge about the dynamics of the economics. And oh, by the way, I didn't mention that I started when I started my university experience, I started as an engineer. I was in materials and metallurgical engineering in OAU. However, I thought, okay, you know what, this thing is too frustrating. I had a different dream at the time. So I switched and I moved to economics, where, because I wanted to do development economics. Remember, I said I was interested in people and then look at the society and how do we optimize organization within the context of the economic and of course, give people capabilities. I got into economics only to realize that all the calculus in this world and the things that I thought I was running away from engineering, I was going to confront them and I had to deal with them. Guess what? Those things that you think are giants, you need to confront them. They become a better version of yourself. So, okay, so that's by design. And so I got into Steolac and I had to do all this research. It was humongous because my dad at the time, whatever paper he had to deliver, he had to deliver it excellently. And you remember that he was a retired director. He had to be concise information. So what? That enabled my researching skills. That enabled my understanding of the financial world, and that enabled every bit of my independence in terms of getting information and not waiting for information. And this is something that most HR professionals do not do. Most often than not, we wait for information to come to us. And I'm speaking to this because those experiences that if you think you are working in one-man company today, do not despise those days, because the amount of learning that you are going to get is going to be incredible. Okay, so let's look at the role of getting connected to people. At the time also, my dad had worked with late Chief S.L. Edu. So Baba took me into his arms, and you know what, like baby granddaughter that he just loved and would say would come, and then connected me to one of his daughters. She's a judge today in Lagos State, and fantastic woman, role model. And that takes me to another point. You will need role models along your path and your journey. Who are the people who nurture you, that you see that their lives are exemplary? And I say role model, I've not necessarily said mentors. I would come to that. So, I mean, she was fantastic. And guess what? So she spoke to Fountain Trust. That was Shegun Aina at the time. And then there was a caller that I see there. And, you know, you would think that everything was all rosy. And of course, I was set to do everything, especially with the experience that I already had in Steolac. And I was still working with Steolac at the time. But even with, I did all the tests. I passed excellently well, but for no reason, the offer never came. And they did everything. In fact, Chief Edo would call at the time and say, what are you guys doing? Where am I going? You may know people. If that door is not for you, be sure to pray seriously about it, because there are times that we launch ourselves into part of destinies that are not necessarily for us. You know what? In Yoruba land, they will say many roads lead to market, but you want to be careful, because that road and the path you may want to take may not be the path that God has ordained for you. So I'm saying that there is a place for diligence. There's a place for what you do. And you know what? We believe that when we have all the right connections, everything should fall into place. There is the place for the path that God takes in our lives and in our journeys. That door just shut, and it shuts completely, you know. And that is why I would say that, one, and don't forget that I talked about the two people that are my friends that we started off together. I want to say to you that have life partners. It is essential. Those life partners are people that you started your journey with. They are people who can look at you in the eye and tell you the truth. They are people who can recalibrate your brain, because they are with you when they started with you when there was nothing. Second part of that I would say to you is have a vision. I had a vision. All these ladies had a vision. And whatever was not going to fit into that vision, they are control measures for you. Because everything may look expedient, but they may not be what you require for your journey. And so, of course, while I was still talking about all of this, one of the things you also need to understand is, in your life, there may have been patterns. Understand those patterns and say, what am I doing with these patterns, and what are these patterns going with me? And so consequently, GSM came into Nigeria in 2001, and I was still working with, I had other small stints with consulting companies. But what that did to me, like I said, it honed my research skills, it honed my ability, my speaking engagement skills, and it honed my ability also to be able to expand my thinking and stretch my thinking. So that gave me critical thinking, that gave me analytical thinking, working in that perspective. Was it small? Yes. But was I growing? Absolutely. I didn't know how all of this would fit into the future I was getting into, but it was essential for the journey, apparently. When I look back with the benefit and the hindsight now, I can say that it was absolutely essential for my journey. And so in 2001, the GSM was coming into town, and there was the rave. I applied like every other person. I started with GSM Center at the time on Saka Tinubu as a customer service rep, and I was super excited. I mean, it was a lot of money if you ask me. At the time, we were paid 40,000 naira, and that was in April. Down the chain, I still followed newspaper adverts, and guess what? I got into Econet Wireless as a customer service rep in the month of July. And that was about where my world was also going to totally change, and all my past experiences around consulting, as it were. And so coming in as a GSM, a customer service rep, you would ask, how did that link to HR? But guess what? That brings me to another nugget. On your path in life, as you look for the big tickets, the small tickets would add up to where you are going. It would open that door of the big ticket. So whatsoever your hand findeth to do now, do it excellently well, because those things become door openers to where you want to go and who you want to be. Whichever part of HR that you are in, or whatever experiences that you are having now. And remember that because I was working with a smaller company, I had to be looking for information myself. That thinking, that analytical, that ability to research is what eventually led me even into doors that opened to me. So let me get into that bit of my journey. So I started off as a customer service rep in July. There was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. And, you know, those were the days where we sat on the floor because the furniture wasn't ready. I remember when we were still testing and getting the network to fire up and all the different training. So one other thing I will say at this point is self-train yourself. And if you don't, and you're waiting for somebody, it will become to your own detriment, or you're waiting for the organization to train you, because eventually you own that knowledge and you own that capabilities. Whilst I was in the contact center, I mean, a lot was happening, because even during that time I was running my MBA. It was the end of my MBA. I had a boss who could not stand me because of the knowledge and the capacity that I had. But how do you do that? One of the things I want to benefit of hindsight, because that repeated itself down the line in my experience when I got into the banking sector. Now, be cautious. Knowledge is good, but how you present knowledge may turn other people off. Not only turn them off, some may become very irritated, or some may feel threatened by the knowledge that you have. Be cautious, be sensitive as you move along your journey. And where you see certain patterns, ask yourself, what should I do and how do I present it differently? So if I go into some of these stories, some people who know me would really understand, and I don't want to get into a situation where I'm pointing names. But there are some other interesting stories. Now, put your heart and your passion, because right now there's a convergence between my passion and my skills that I have gained. What is that passion? I love people. I want to align them with purpose. And the other skill sets that I have was, of course, I had gained how to research, I had gained how to maneuver, I had gained problem solving. That gave me an edge in customer service, because I then began to utilize all of that. So what did I learn about the depth of service as I worked? Because in working with some of the customers, I remember that helped me to build relationship management. Of course, you cannot be in HR and not be a good relationship manager. That helped me to build communication skills, because it's not, there are ways that you have to pass information. You can tell people to go to hell and they will be singing along and be dancing as they are going to the hell. But that is what being in customer service enables you to do, because you then have critical information within the organization, but you can't pass it to the customer raw as you have it. How do you create a sandwich methodology that enables you to pass information in a way that the recipient also would understand and suddenly becomes sympathetic even to your cause and becomes an advocate for you? In the course of working as a customer service rep, I remember mending relationships that culminated into marriages. I remember understanding people's issues and being able to resolve issues that would have been catastrophic to the organization, and eventually getting different awards for this. And I know that my colleagues at the time used to just laugh and say, how do you get to do this? How do all these issues even come to you? I remember resolving issues that mended homes, relationships, and especially, in fact, there's an interesting story of a family that the father insisted that I become a mentor to the son. Today, the son is married, happily married, and can't even forget, because eventually the man died within a few months of that conversation. And of course, I've had to handhold the son, because he's an only son. And then, of course, the mother, who is now aged today. But I'm happy that the son is living and doing well. And what am I saying? Being in that position at that time, one could have looked at it as, what are you doing? You're sitting down, you're taking calls, you're what? But it was also impacting lives, and there are evidences of that today. The interesting dimension of that is, when I was in that role, I didn't foresee that today I will come back and be a customer care lead across 9 entities. And so no experience, that is where I am going. No experience that you have is ever wasted. Rather, your experiences of today would culminate into what you become tomorrow. And so in that role, I learned stakeholder management, which is a critical part of HR. I learned information management. Every day in HR, information comes. And the things, in fact, I had one, and by all means, I am not sure if everybody on the call will be HR practitioners, because there could have been people who are seeing this on LinkedIn or from and then they just choose to be part of it. I recall, and I know that some of you would have had experiences where your organization have been put on social media, and it may not necessarily be what is correct about your organization. The question is, you now have to manage, one, your customers who are out there who will see that information. You need to do a brand reputation management. You will also need to do internal management of the impact of that information. You don't want to lose your staff. Or how do you also ensure that your processes, your internal dynamics does not lose value also, or does not even create a diminishing factor for your executive team? So now the experiences that I have had and the skill set that I had then is now also coming back to me. And also, the other dimension of that is my experience while I was working as a customer service rep also enabled me to understand the different parts of the business and the organization. And that opened vistas to me, because how are you going to be in HR if you do not know what the business of the organization is? I understood at that time that, look, I speak to the source of money. And if I don't enable that process, money ain't coming back into the organization. And that helped me to understand what sales was doing, what the role of marketing, what the role of people in the back office were, what's happened in technology, the diverse arms of technology, how IT is different from the technical group, and that gave me full insight. That kitted me for the role that I was looking forward to becoming into HR. But what eventually launched me into HR And that's launching into HR started as a minimal part of the customer care group at the time in 2001. How did it happen? Guess what? Because we had started off, but because GSM was new, nobody knew anything. And remember that when I was in consulting, one of the things I used to do was a lot of research, and I enjoyed teaching. In fact, my holiday days in my university then, when we used to have a lot of ASU strike, I would assemble all the children around the university quarters and would start lesson for them. Myself and another friend, Nike, or Debbie, she's Mrs. Rolwaye now, and we had a lesson where we would just teach and teach and teach children. So that's my passion, and that passion still led me into training today. I don't mind. I guess that's part of the reasons why I'm having this conversation. And so when you combine some of the skills that you've had in your past, don't worry, they come full blown. They enable that future that you are looking at. So guess what? I would sit down and then look into countries where GSM technology was in operation. I would sit for materials. I started to sit down and say, look, I will work with our NMC network guys at the time. I had to understand what some of those technologies were and sit down and work with them, and started to create product manuals that would enable other members of the team. Don't forget that I was still a rep at the time. I was an agent, and sit down and you could say agents with experience, as it were. A number of us were with experience, but because we wanted to pivot and we wanted to be part of something new, so of course we got into that space and would sit down and start to create manuals, because other people will struggle to understand product futures. So I would sit down with the network guys, would pieces it into smaller items. What you would call today, that's what you use. Those foundations are the foundations of design thinking, as we call it today. And then we would pieces it and then say, how would people understand it? And that was when the dummy series were out. Dummy, this for dummies, that for dummies. So we were trying to create product for dummies within EcoNet at the time, and the days of how do people understand body? How do people would understand liberty and the different types of liberty products that we have? What is business partner, for those of you who had the experience? And then we will break down the products and then the context around the products, and then I would share it. And so we began to realize, what was I doing? I was filling a gap and a need. So I'm asking you today, wherever you are, what are those gaps that are there? And what you never can tell as you fill those gaps if it will take you in the direction where you want to go. So as I was filling those gaps, it became apparent that, look, we needed a training and development section in the customer side that would begin to train people. Our core HR team did have that competence. We had that competence. And so that was what led to creating training and development. And that was how my skill set began to find expression within the organization. Because if you needed somebody who understood this, then, oh no, we go and tell them, go and explain to them. And then you know what? We started to have product committees, and then they needed somebody who was customer facing. They will bring me in. Now, what did that do to me? Remember that by my role, I was already relating with different parts of the organization. It just gave me more exposure into the organization. What am I going to say? My next nugget to you is, don't be afraid. You just need to step up to that game. As you recognize the gap, ask yourself, how can I close this gap? And do it with all diligence. As you do it, somebody is looking and somebody is watching. So with a training department being created, that moved me. So I would say my launch into HR started from my training abilities and ability to design manuals that people could use. But it didn't then stop there. We then had a situation whereby we needed to bring in 250 people. Remember that the organization was growing. As at the time we started, how many people were we? But we needed to be able to put knowledge and enable people. We realized that if we were able to grow the contact centers at the time, and if we grow that contact center, people had more access because we were going to start language routine. When we started off, we only started with English. However, people would call in and say, èmi ò gbóyìnbó ẹwẹ́ni tó gbọ́ Yorùbá dá tó lè bẹ́ èmi sọ̀rọ̀. That means I don't understand English, but I have just bought the phone. Don't forget that there were women who were in Lagos Island who had shops in gutter, and these people controlled millions. They used the phone. Some of them bought Turaya at the time when Turaya first came out. And so they had money to buy the phone when we first of all started. And phone was what? It was 30,000 naira with the SIM card in the beginning. 30,000 naira was a lot of money in 2001. If I remember, I said my starting salary was 40,000 naira in GSM Center at Zakati Lumode. And so guess what? They would buy the phone, but because they are not educated, they needed somebody to enable them and teach them. So we had not started routing. So, but some of us who could speak the different languages, we would step up into it. And by the way, of course, I speak very well when it gets to Yoruba language. And so we found the people who could speak Igbo, the people who could speak Hausa. But the thing we were after at the time was the satisfaction of the customer. Today, you as an HR professional, if you do not understand what service is, and that you are in the business of service to the organization and the satisfaction of the business that you work with, you're already on your way out of the organization. So that skill set also enabled me also at the time. And then guess what? We began to see that the call center was a high-pressured environment. People are talking 24/7. It can be draining. When you are also in front of the computer, it had impact on your eyes, it had impact on your back. And then, of course, the work times was different from the rest of the organization. I dare say that the advent of contact center brought 24/7 work in a different dimension to the workspace in Nigeria. It was a complete change. So it also meant that we needed to look at the welfare, the dynamics of the contact center. So that took me away from just training and development. So there was now a need for a people development unit, which at the time I then championed with Chike Otubelu. And what it meant is we started to do surveys. What enabled people to work differently in this environment? And we were also going to bring in 250 people into the contact center. So I had to still blend training, by the way, but we created a people development unit. And in doing that, it also meant that we had to look at our project management skills and say, how do we run this? So if we're going to bring 250 people in, we needed to run a recruitment. So I gained recruitment skills. We created a project plan. How do you run that and ensure that all of these 250 people are ready within a space of 11 weeks and they have to start to deliver value optimally? What is that if it is not HR? It has changed significantly from what we were created. So we developed the manual. How do we conduct the training? It meant that we brought a new skill of thinking. Again, I mentioned design thinking. How do we run multiple teams simultaneously so that we can deliver on this number by the end of that 11 weeks, totally fit? So it meant that, for example, if some people were doing products training, some were doing systems training, which Chike was handling at the time, and eventually Folayemi Balogun, who is head of HR, also at INSEA today, was also running products training. And then we were looking at how we were running all of those streams. So if you were on this stream, you could go to the next batch and then come here. So simultaneously, we had about 4 batches of 30 people who we were running training for, who were going to be ready within a period of 6 weeks. And we did the same thing. So in terms of the recruitment, we had to design the assessment center that will be a best fit into the environment. And of course, in those days, we created simulations around your ability to listen. And so we tested listening, we tested the speed at which we could enter information, and at the same time, the speed at which you could process that information and then deliver it. And that was how we started to use assessment centers within the contact center environment so that we can get the best fit. So we listen to your voice, your articulation, and all of those things. And what do you do in HR? Isn't that part of the recruitment process that you use to look at the culture fit, the technical fit? And so we created some competency framework at the time to fit into this. So what eventually happened was that we were running our own HR within the customer care group. And that was because that was where the competency stayed. And so that was what launched me into it. And eventually, what happened in that space? What did I learn? What did I take away from it? So from my past, I found that all the skill sets, all the things that I have learned and capabilities were also things that was required for that future that I was going to create. And also in the bit of stepping up, we were able to create the future that we required today. So what do you need to do differently is what I would ask you. And so you found out that the things that we were doing, the different surveys, were actually OD things. That is what you call organizational development. We didn't realize it at the time, but we started what you would call staff happiness index. And guess what? That is what organizations do as staff satisfaction survey today. And the things that would culminate into employee engagement, we started to look at it as motivational series. That was what we called it at the time. So all the things that stretched one's thinking was actually, and don't forget that I said I had the passion to do people things, and that was what led us into that whole space. And so what I would say to you is, my key learning from that is that let your passion push you into higher levels of thinking and doing. And as you do it, you will find that it launches you into the space that you actually are seeking. Suddenly, the doors will open. And so what happened is, within 3 to 4 people at the time, myself, Folayemi Balogun, Chike Otubelu, and Jubril Saba, we began to break things and remold things. So my next thing to you and my key lesson to you is, except you reinvent yourself, the doors you seek don't open. You must constantly reinvent yourself. So we moved away from the thinking we were serving customers to start to think about the people who serve that customer and what we can do to fill the gaps. And that launched us significantly into the HR world. And then, so of course, I had mentioned how we then needed to do all of it. So stepping up eventually enabled the reality of my dream. And what did we do? So at that time also, I had pioneered the welfare committee, working with the core HR team of the organization. And what did that do? They began to recognize the capabilities, the things that we were doing, and the demands we were making to enable people. So as core HR was going to the organization, to the leadership of the company to say, oh, we need this to do for our people, I was presenting that on behalf of the customer care team based on data and statistics. And so that's first and foremost, I want to tell you, if you're in HR and you're not thinking the kind of data, remember I said we were running surveys, we had staff happiness index, we were running data that was enabling even the core HR team at the time. And guess what? Eventually the core HR team had to decide and say, we need to restructure. We cannot keep these people in there. We need them back in the team. And that was how I moved into the full HR stream, or we all moved into the full HR stream. But what were the things we were doing? At that time, we started to run training needs analysis, which wasn't even being run globally at the time at the organization. And don't forget that things were new. So we were breaking the boundaries. We had 360-degree feedback that we were running. We created a tool internally, which eventually got the organization to think, shouldn't we be doing it? Of course, eventually, when we got into the bigger HR space, we got, oh my God, what's the name of this organization? To then began to do it even for leadership at the time. We had motivational interventions. I had mentioned that. Oh, by the way, we used that to create a knowledge management system. What did that mean? We began to ask ourselves deep questions, because as we saw that we were growing, and I'm referring, when I use the word we, myself, Chike, Folayemi, and Jubril, and eventually Demola Adewusi, who came into the team. As we were growing, we said to ourselves that, look, what made sense is we need to find a repository where all the knowledge, all the products, all the manuals that we're creating, all the surveys could stay. If we're not there, who will handle this and how will this run? And so we were thinking about the future that will be without us, but will be with other people. As an HR practitioner, maybe we didn't also understand it fully, but also in HR, you talk about business continuity, you talk about knowledge retention, and then you talk about succession planning, which was what we were looking to do with the knowledge management system. How will the generations who come after us see how things have evolved and how they are running? And so, of course, we had assessment centers, which you can then now use, and we created that concept and began to use it globally within the organization. And then one other thing we had a mentorship program. Significantly, this blew knowledge management, blew adaptation, increased the speed and the turnaround time of getting people to become functional experts within the contact center. And of course, that was my first contact with coaching, because we had to look at it that people were having challenges, and they were not necessarily the challenges that were had to do with the knowledge of the work. The question was the deployment of the knowledge. So there were inhibitions to the deployment of the knowledge. What do we do? That was when we said, look, we had to become coaches, and we had to also go for training around it. And then how do we enable and create super coaches within the team, so that when people are having challenges, we eliminate the thought pattern that is holding them down to utilize the knowledge that they have. And so what am I ultimately saying? The key knowledge to take out of that whole space is, when you are skilled and competent, your world will seek you out. People require competency. They require the knowledge. You will be sought out if you know your onions and you do what you are supposed to do. And so from that point, things started to move extremely fast, and I actually, when you guys asked me to do this today, it became very nostalgic for me. I went back into some of the archives so that I could remember some bits of the journey. Time has gone. I'm talking about some donkey years of experience. And I remember particularly, as you grow into parts and you become leadership, because it then meant that I had a team. I started to get to the point where I now become not as a specialist this time, but you are also managing people. One thing that is absolutely essential for you as an HR practitioner, remember I started by saying you have to have a vision. So that was about me. Now, when you start to have a team, it is essential you create the vision of the team and ensure that everybody got on board. Remember that I was amongst peers and we were working. The dynamics is changing, and I had become a manager. And now you're managing people to deliver on the priority. The question is, what priorities are you going to get people to deliver on? If you do not create a vision of where we are going and the things we need to do on that journey, then you are not going to be traveling with the people. You are going to be doing your journey alone. And when you journey alone, you are likely to get weary very quickly, because all the parts that need to be fixed, no single tree ever made a forest, will never, ever get fixed. And I'm going to give us a story. So I had another colleague, when he was trying to make a manager of the team, also within that space, she felt she should be the manager as well. So we were both put through interview process. It turned out that I came through that interview. And so what did that mean? You're going to have some of these experiences. People who were your peers, you are suddenly going to become their manager. What do you need to do when that happens? Of the truth is this. You must separate and be very intentional about the vision of the team, the action plan of the vision, and the people capabilities of that team. And you must be clear about your own values. What are you going to tolerate? And what are you not going to be able to tolerate? You must understand the threshold of the capabilities that will drive that vision. Anything less than that threshold, you must throw it out. It is no longer peer-to-peer. It is no longer what we call in Yoruba language, fidigbodi. You must be stern. You must be assertive. These are qualities that you require to move into that space. So what happened with this particular individual? So you know what, she took advantage of it, that look, it's Kunbi, we're peers. Anyway, it's only that she got lucky that she became the manager. So not only was she practicing absenteeism, she was practicing presenteeism. Presenteeism is you are there, but you are not giving the value that you are required to give. So she would, and I needed to put things into place. So I would have a conversation first. The conversation wasn't working. She would just call my bluff, or she would give me an attitude. So I realized that this wasn't going to continue, because every member of the team was also looking to see how I will handle it. After all, you guys are friends. And that is where I'm going. You must draw the line of friendship and professionalism, especially for when you become a leader amongst your peers. So I would send an email that this is not going to happen, that I had a conversation with you, you said you would. And so it got to the point where I had to keep a catalog and then query and say that subsequently, if this you will not adjust, you will no longer be a member of the team. Now, that sort of jolted. Initially, she was very bitter, but guess what? She took it to other leaders within the business who were much at a higher level, and they enabled her to see. But what is most important is within the first 3 months you assume a role, if you don't set the rule, that team will never achieve the purpose you have set, that it has been set. And you would enable everyone to fail, including yourself. So you must be stern, and within 3 months, let everybody know that this is now the way of work and not what it used to be. Well, so conversely, as that went on, I mean, I then had to, I had another boss who came in and who was looking at things from different levels. And then I then became, we started to look at the different competencies and the career maps within the organization, not just within the customer care group, you know. And whilst we were still doing all of that, there were ongoing conversations within the organization. But I need to take a detour a bit and tell a story. Remember, so my vision one was one, I wanted to work with people. I wanted to align the people and bring the bridge between the people and the organization and deliver for target and purpose. So ensure the people are happy and ensure that the organization got value. Whilst I wasn't too clear, I just knew that was what I wanted to do. And I am, by the grace of God, I have testimonials of having done that severally within the organization. But as I did that, one thing I also knew was that I knew that playing on the local plane wasn't just what I wanted. I wanted to become a global HR practitioner. And the question was, how do I make that happen? To make that happen, this is an interesting journey. I started to seek people who were globally certified in Nigeria. I had started my CIPM. When I looked at it, I realized that the skills and the capabilities that I have acquired were by far at the time before the renewal or recent renewal of some of the curriculum. I had gone beyond that. So it wasn't what I wanted to do. So my thing to you and my key lesson to you is evaluate where you are, evaluate your vision and ask yourself, is what you are getting now what would take you to where you want to be? If not, where should you find it? And so that thought was what led me to, and I applaud today two female persons, Ejine Nzeribe, wherever she is, God bless her, and Chizoba Mojeku. A number of you may know her in the HR world. I approached Chizoba, and that takes me to another point. You remember I talked about audacity. Let audacity push you to seek out the people you require who would mentor you. You require mentorship, not tormentors. Please note the difference. There would always be people within your organization who can mentor you. There will always be the door openers, and there would always be the platform providers. The door openers just go ahead and recommend you. The platform providers will give you platforms for your skill and your capabilities to show. They are not necessarily recommending you, but they create an environment where your skills would be, there's a presentation to be done. They send you to go there. And when you go there, that suddenly becomes a platform for you to blossom. Ejine Nzeribe did that. In terms of the mentorship that I require, Chizoba was working at MTN. As I was searching, remember I had research skills, and I told you that all your fundamental skills back, whatever skill you may be acquired, may not have wasted. As I searched it, I began to realize that there was somebody called Chizoba. I had never met her. I wrote her. That is where audacity is. Remember, you are the one who is in need. She's not the person who is in need. You need to learn from her. So the question is, and that is why this is fantastic, the people who have gone ahead of you, what were the things they did? So I reached out to her and noticed that she was the first GPHR, Global HR Practitioner. By that time, HRC and SHRM were still together as certifying bodies and bodies of knowledge for HR globally. And she was one of the first few sets to be certified globally. I said, yeah, what did she do? Then I must learn. And remember, ignorance serves you nothing. But the day you know, it is never written on your forehead that you don't know. But the day you know, the world knows what you carry inside of you. So guess what? I reached out to her and I said, I need to do this. How did you go about this and all? So guess what? She was more than happy to support my dream. And so I had a good conversation with her. And I had not met her physically. We were just having emails, LinkedIn conversations, as it were. And what? She gave me everything that I required, and I never forgot. And so that was how myself and Jubril Sabah at the time, in 2000 and 2006, I believe, between 2006 and 2007, we then did the SHR and GPHR course, because we then needed to know that, look, what do we know as at this time? and what don't we know that we need to start to build on. And by the way, because I was relating with the people in HR and we were moving to the score at the center at the time, I had started to do a lot of things. We had a number of expatriates, and so I started to do a number of things on international HR at the time. And guess what? I did that exam and I failed it. I failed. I failed by a few marks. Did I meet the cutoff point? That year I was a mess. I cried and what? So now that takes me to the next point. Failure is not final. It is what you do with it. Failure is an event. It does not define you. It is what you do with it that then defines who you are. I hope we got that. Failure is just an event. Failure is not your name. It doesn't have to define you except you give it a label that defines you. It is what you do with it that then defines who you become. So I sat back down and then asked myself, what should I do differently? How could I have missed this number of marks? It was just crazy for me. I was really upset. I didn't eat. My husband eventually had to call my dad. Those days I used to sleep in a Koyi Club library. Everybody knew me, including Gateman. As I come in the morning 7 a.m. and I close there 10 p.m. That was a different ball game, and failing it just threw me off. Days I was sick, I cried, I was everything. So the temptation is to say, look, I'm not doing this again. After all, I've not lost my job. Nobody needs to know. I can get going. But what did I do? I said to myself, I need to go and find where that knowledge is. As an HR practitioner, never, ever be content with where you are. I repeat it, never be content with where you are. Remember, I mentioned the fact that you need to reinvent yourself. And that was one key factor. I have not been able to achieve this. I've got to conquer it. So I then asked myself what to do next. I saw that there was going to be a master class in Canada. That was my first trip ever to Canada. I was a local girl. Let me backtrack. My childhood, yes, some experiences, but I hadn't been to Canada at the time. So I mentioned it to my husband, who incidentally, one of my sister-in-laws was there, one of his cousins, fantastic lady. And I said, no problem, I'm going to write for you and all of that. So the journey to get a visa began. And then I went to meet my boss, Ejine Nzeribe. For those of you who always think ethnicity, I beseech you by the mercies of the living God, flush that out of your system. Most of the people who have enabled me through my journey were not necessarily Yorubas. I didn't see ethnicity. I saw humanity. See humanity in your journey and practice humanity all the way first. And so Ejine looked at me and said, Kunbi, I love this. I love your tenacity and I am behind you. Remember, I said, look for platform providers, understand the ones who open doors, and then understand the ones who would mentor you. Oh my goodness. She always embraced me even and supportive. So she was really nurturing me and mentoring me along. And she said to me, I don't have much, but I have a $50. And I'm going to give it to you because I believe in you. There are people who want to invest in you, find them. And my goodness, $50 was a lot of money as a 2008. You can go and check the value today for those of you who are in the finance world and tell us what $50 today is $50. What $50 then, the value of $50 today. And then that was how I went, and I went to Canada. And what happened to me? Now, when you restrict your world, you restrict who you can become. When you restrict your world, you restrict your perspectives, and your perspectives will always keep you at the level of the knowledge that you are. So what did I do? In Canada, Canada was another thing for me. It launched me into the power of networking. Your network becomes your net worth. Be deliberate and intentional about networking. And so that was how I met Lance Richards for the first time. He's supposed to be a subject matter expert, and I'm sure right now he's so old. So I went for a master class. I met a number of lifetime friends that I have kept, whether they are Indians, they are from the Arabian countries, I met all diverse people. But I enjoyed the network and I enjoyed the classes. And I remember Lance Richards making a comment about Nigeria, and at the time, it was very nasty. He probably didn't even realize that there was a Nigerian in class. I stood up. Remember what I said about audacity. I stood up and I challenged his thinking and his comments, and I gave the facts. The guy froze, openly apologized. But guess what? I didn't take that as a nasty whatever. What I did was to took it and used it to launch for the next phase. And that was how I got into SHRM, got into creating the communities. And guess what? And I said to myself that this is changing the plane for me. In 2008, I got certified as one of the first 10 within Nigeria at that time, because I also felt I needed to do my mentor proud. She's about who enabled me and who pushed me along. And there are other people that I have not mentioned, somebody like Tomini Yoni. Oh no, he gave me that dream to ensure that I became part of CIPM and began to give value. Tomini at the time, I think, was working in SEC or so at the time. And anyway, that was how I got certified, came back into Nigeria and utilizing my network, and then began the first class of GPHR in Nigeria. And I'm asking you today, I challenge you. This is a noble profession that builds people and gives them a future that they have dreamt of, and also enables organizations to become what they have chosen to be in the society, as long as it's for positive value. How are you giving back into that profession? And so that was how GPHR started, SHRM started in Nigeria with Oliver Nona. And we began to see, how do we push the frontiers of the knowledge and expand beyond what has always been in country. And so that's another story and another dimension. And I began to teach till we handed over to the other generations of people like BC Pokuola, Lolade Ogungbero also, who is head of HR director of WEMA, and a number of host of other people. Adora, people may say Adora, you all know, who then also began to teach GPHR extensively in Nigeria today. And let me tell you, it's not about age, it is about vision, it's about the passion and what you choose to do with the value that you carry inside of you. I dare say, a candle loses nothing by lighting others. All we do is to create a brighter world for the rest of other people who are coming. They don't have to go through the aura. Not everybody's going to have money to go for a master class. How do we bring it back to here so that we can build more professionals and create better organizations for every one of us? And that was what we did at the time. Okay, so let me now backtrack. Now that I have become certified, of course, more to whom much is given, much becomes expected. And we were growing so big as an organization. A lot of changes was also happening within the organization. It was about the time, remember, I started to do career development, career mapping. We started to look at the different careers, and there were tons of roles within the organization. How do you enable people to grow? How do you create pathways of growth? As we were working on this, there were changes that were happening. We had moved from Econet to Celtel, and Celtel became different ownerships, different cultures, and different companies. But I mean, one company, but with different experiences. And as we're doing this, boom, my boss at the time, Chioma was then called to go to Bahrain. A whole lot was happening. And so guess what? I then became manager of leadership development. that brought a new vista to me, because we then needed to look at leadership paths, the kind of leader, creating leadership profiles, who is a leader, and what should a leader named as a leader within the Zane organization, and what should become. And that all that input, remember that I talked about I had research skills, so that was what I was putting into use, gathering all the data globally, and a ton of work and lots of analysis. I guess this is one of the things that have defined me, because if you were to ask my team members today where I work, they would speak to all of this and say, look, she's going to ask you, what is the data backing this up? So eventually, all of that, I was a feeder pipe. And there was another team who was working in Bahrain, and that was what led us into creating managing at Zane. So we started to implement that. And as we started the implementation, I remember there was a whole lot that was going on in terms of restructuring. We weren't too sure. It wasn't at our level left. It was also at the regional level. But I knew, I was aware by the project that I was doing. It's only that I didn't know what my new role was going to become, or the dimension it was going to take locally. So I just kept on doing what I was doing. Now, in doing what you do, don't ever think nobody is noticing. Whether you do it well, somebody sees it. Whether you do it bad or you do it diligently, somebody is also noticing it. It will speak for you. Your work speaks. Your work has a voice and it speaks. And so eventually, when all that restructuring was going to happen, boom, I came back from the leadership development course, which I had input into, but not totally. And in fact, at the time, it was engineer, and that was how I developed. Again, I mentioned about network. Stephanie Wambui, she's in Ghana now, and then we worked with a Barry. There were a number of different guys here and there. That one was in the UK, one was in the US. And you know what? That expanded our own views and things. And then we were part of that training. We came out of that training. On the day it was ending, that was when I became an HR manager that moved into the technical team. And guess what? That part, even though I had worked with them in the earlier part of my career, it was something entirely, totally different. I now got into the part where I need to know what BTS is, where, what fiber, what radio network, who is a rigger, who is. And unfortunately, because at the time, Jubril became head of HR, and then I was now taking over that space, there was no handover note. What do you do when there's no handover note? Remember, I had mentioned stakeholder management, information management, analytics, problem solving, and critical thinking. All of those things came back to fore. I needed to build relationship and understand, okay, so what is the only thing I got was the structure. And that was after about 3 weeks, because it was also chaotic for him. The question is, what is your navigation, organizational navigation capabilities with your relationship skills? How do you navigate your organization? And if we were to come to your organization and ask, who are you, what would they say? So if your organizational navigation capabilities is 0, you need to start to work on it. How are you building relationships across the divides of the organization so that the information you require to function comes to you? So I had to step into that place, and it was extremely notorious. We had, so there are things I can speak to, there are things I cannot speak to. I think our time is fast spent. My story is not a story that I can tell in 2 hours, but I'm going to try and shorten some of it and just try to put some of the critical learnings out there. It was really tough, I must confess, working in that space. But here again, remember I mentioned the concept of faith. There are times I spent time, I would say I would fast, and then I said to myself, show me what I need to do, dear Lord, and how to get going with each of these people. Number one thing I would say to you as an HR practitioner is understand the priority of the business that you are handling. Get to the heart of the business lead, understand what is important to them, and move the needle. Create a priority list for that and move that needle. As at the time, it was John Ellie that was leading. So I remember walking up to his office and introducing myself as his HR business partner, and just a familiarization tour. I went with no ears and I asked him, help me to understand your experiences in this organization. So, you know what? That broke the ice for him. Somebody wanted to listen to him. Somebody wanted to understand his experiences. Always break the ice on the other side. Always break the ice on the other side. Don't wait for the other side to come to you. So I went to him. Remember my concept and my early learnings in customer service. So, I mean, if you call me today, all I'm saying is, how may I help you? How can I make your day brighter? And so I went to him, help me understand your experiences. And so he launched into stories that relieved him. And guess what? Make your partner comfortable with you. When they are comfortable with you, they will build trust. When they build trust, they will also enable the ease of delivery of your own work. So he was comfortable. So I then asked him, how can I make this experience better? What do you want me to do to create a lasting experience for you and build a legacy? Fantastic. He said, write. And I began to write. And I wrote exceedingly. And I told him, by the time we were finished, I ran everything by him again. When I finished it, I then said to him, let me prioritize it. Let's prioritize it. Which should I fix first within the first 3 months, and then the next 3 months, and then the next 3 months? And guess what? He did the priority himself as well. When I finished, I told him by end of day, he's going to get a catalog of all the conversation that we had. Nobody had done that with him. I sent the catalog of the conversation. I sent the priorities, and I put into it what I had set into motion right after. Now, I didn't wait till end of day. Within 2 hours of that conversation, he got the priority. The guy said, what happened here? So guess what? I gave that priority and worked with it. I cleared not just the first 3 months. There were things in the next 6 months that I finished within the first 6 weeks. He got a week by week feedback on what had been done, what was going on, and what the status was. Guess what happened? Can anybody guess? Within 2 to 3 weeks of all of this conversation, this is a man that never used to come to HR floor. People saw him coming downstairs, coming to look for me. He came in one morning and said, please, I'm looking for Kunbi. Is she around, and when she gonna get in? And it was, everybody stood still. Now, people will think that you are doing magic. In fact, I remember they laughed at me and said, you have taken their name to Orioke to pray. And I said, no, even though I call those things that be not as though they were, I speak to their spirit and we align in this place of the spiritual. But I do not have to go to Orioke. What I need to do is to understand what is service, what will enable this person be successful, and I enable that process. So I'm asking you today, and I'm challenging you. What are you doing to enable the other person and understand that it is about their success? When they are successful, you then become successful. Anyway, so that was that regime. And then I had another regime, and significantly, I was still working with the technical team, but guess what? The more you do, the more the scope expands. And I'm going to challenge you, never be afraid to take expanded scope. I have seen a number of people say, no, I can't do that. I don't have capability. Don't come and kill me, or don't bring this. Don't even bring it near here. Guess what? You will always stay at the level of what you know only. The more you expand yourself, the more you prepare yourself for higher responsibilities that will come your way, because you continue to build competencies and capabilities as you expand. And so Incidentally, that was expanded into operations group. I then had to work with Deepak Savista. That was another exciting area altogether in my career. Now I'm going to put it out there to you. As you work with people, understand cultural nuances, recognize it, and reconcile it with your own perspectives. I repeat, recognize cultural nuances, reconcile it, and recognize, respect it, and reconcile it. So there were nationalities that I worked with at the time. They didn't shake women. It wasn't necessarily their fault. They simply thought that, their culture and their orientation. Remember, I said you cannot rise above the perspectives of what you know. The culture and the orientation they had did not give that credence to women at the time. And remember that what I'm saying is years back. That has since changed. After all, we also had the president who talked about other room and the position of women in the other room. So there will always be cultural nuances in the organization. You cannot take it out. And I will speak to more of culture also when I start to talk about some of my experiences in Leadway. So eventually, I say I have just about 30 minutes now. Wow. Somebody actually said I need to do this in series, but it's okay. We'll cover as much as we can. Now I was dealing with operations group. Within operations groups, we had IT, we had the network, and we had customer care, because that was the core of operations, and there was need for synergy to happen in that space. Now, one of the things that the challenge that the COO had at the time was also some of these cultural nuances, but I needed to break it. So what did I do? Now that's why I said you must recognize cultural nuances, but there must be application of wisdom from you as an HR perspective, because you need to get your work done. How you get it done takes diplomacy and tact. Employ diplomacy, employ tact, and be sure to provide facts and figures to whosoever you need to deal with. People don't argue with figures. People don't argue with facts that are backed with figures. So I realized that this guy likes figures. This guy likes to, and there were certain things that needed to be fixed because he was just going to settle into Nigeria. So they had called me. So the first day I was going to introduce myself to him, I had to dig out what was his best meal. What does this guy like? And I went to get it. Remember, a gift opens the door to the giver. So I went to get the gift. It was lunch. I realized that I waited till lunch hour, and I had sent people to watch on the floor how the day has been tedious and all of that. So I just walked into his door. I greeted him. I said, this is who I am. I'm introducing myself, and I said, I've worked with, and I mentioned some of the leaders that I have worked with. Remember, you put facts, figures, leaders who can attest to your competency, and said, and I am glad to work with you because I believe I will enable your dreams and vision to make sure this organization becomes number one and creates an incredible footprint. He looked up and said, repeat that again. Don't forget that I said to you, always say to people what would enable them and the purpose for which they are in the organization, at least the immediate purpose that is apparent. And he said, repeat that again. And I repeated it. And I said, by the way, I noticed that you've not had lunch. So I took the liberty to get you this. Have a fantastic lunch, and I'll be glad to know when you're available to hold a conversation. I've already done 1, 2, 3 things. Do you mind me sharing with you on your email? So I was putting proactivity into play. I understood what his appetite and dimensions and the way he thinks. So you must see people beyond them as just numbers before you. What are the nuances that surround them and what would enable them to become where they want to be? So, of course, He looked at me, smiled, and said, okay, you may drop the food there. I'll reach out back to you. I said, have you set the numbers? I've set the numbers. And then I went out of his office. So I guess he must have thought, let me speak to 1, 2, 3 people, because again, that shocked him. He had never had that kind of experience. And so the following day, his PA called me and said, look, ABC wants to see you. I said, okay, that's fine. And I got into his office and I said, may I sit down? And then, have you had a chance to look at the numbers? Oh, he said, yes. And then we had a conversation. Was the second time there wasn't any room to shake hands. I wasn't going to be that forward. And then there was an incident. I got onto that incident, quickly ensured mobilization. It was going to affect the network. It was going to be a disaster, created a cross-functional team. We really looked at it and then got them fired up. By the time he heard it and heard what had happened, he said, tell her to see me. He just gave me a call. That was the first time he was going to call. So I didn't even know he had my number. He called me and said, see me. I got into his office. He wasn't shaking my hand. He came with a backhand hug to say, how are you today? That ice was broken. But remember, it was with a lot of tact and diplomacy. And I eventually had a good time because we ran through massive projects. Within these operations, we had I worked with Oliver Wyman at the time also. Remember that I said when you show capabilities, you'll be exposed to a number of things. And the learnings with Oliver Wyman was absolutely out of this world. So at that point in time, I built another network in that space. And then remember, I started with a small consulting firm. That consulting capabilities was also brought to fore with Oliver Wyman. Not only did we restructure Commercial Group, I worked with them. I had no business with Commercial Group. I was put on that project. That gave me new vistas and understanding. And in that space also, we restructured because we were changing from modular business model. We were also moving into vendor managed services. I worked on the restructuring project and the vendor management services that moved 427 employees straight up to Ericsson without anything being broken. And today I see those guys. We are best of pals. Their careers have significantly grown because the way it was managed and the value proposition. Be careful when you give value proposition. It must be beneficial to both the organization and the individual. That was another fun. In fact, I became a restructuring major, so to say, because I eventually did this with not just Ericsson, with IBM and with Huawei. At the time, we also had ITS at for the IT team. So that's also a whole lot went into that space. There were stories that I could give around audacity, around courage, and facing things as it were. That's and as you learn, you document and you enable. Never forget, there will be things that are fearful to you. But guess what? Those fears, when you don't confront them, you don't become a bigger and better version of yourself. If you have a dream that is not bigger than you, then it's not worth dreaming or worth acting on. So eventually, and in between all of this and all the changes, I also had this experience where we had to do job evaluation because, again, we were changing and so much changes were happening. And in that job evaluation, that opened another vista. But the reason why I could be entrusted with that is the number of projects that I had self-driven, that I had self-learned. In all my stories, remember, I never waited for the organization to teach me. I go seek that knowledge and utilize it. The knowledge you learn and you utilize qualifies you for the next level that you are looking for. I repeat that the knowledge that you go seeking and you then utilize qualifies you, not you waiting for the organization to train you before you then now get to where you are going. It is what you Yorubas will say, organizations most times want to test what you carry before they say this. And so you look for how you get that knowledge. Anyhow, you need to get it and get going. I'm giving you the story of going to SHRM. And I consistently do that, by the way, every year, whether you pay for me or you don't. I have found my way to SHRM conference because the knowledge and the vistas that I gained. And I chose also to give myself to the local team, also to enable that knowledge and the expansion of that knowledge within the profession, as it were. So eventually I was out of country. Actually, I was at SHRM conference. And I thought that, look, I've done a whole lot in this space and I've been enabled by God. Maybe I need to see what it is somewhere else. I wasn't even thinking so much. But remember, I talked about patterns, understand it, evaluate it, and be sure you can apply wisdom within the concept of that. So what did I do? And I was outside the country. I was at the conference when a recruiter reached out to me and said, look, we've been watching, and that's why I said you never know who is watching, and said, we now require this in this organization. Come and work with this organization. So eventually that was how I moved to Alcatel-Lucent. And I mean, I dare say one of the things that is essential, remember I said that I learned stakeholder management, I learned information management. Beginning, I would have gone to work with Prudence, it didn't work. I would have gone to work with Fountain Trust, it didn't work. Eventually, Standard Chartered Bank came, and I went into Standard Chartered Bank. Now, there are two stories that I want to tell quickly about Standard Chartered Bank while I was there. Interesting and fantastic. I was poached, by the way, and got in. The first story, and I'm speaking back to courage and to dream and to enabling people and ensuring value that the organization can get. There was this lady who incidentally today has now become my neighbor, and that is life. Whatever you do comes back to you, whether you see it or not. It may not be apparent, it may not be direct, but there will always be something that comes back. So be cautious. Each day you are sowing a seed, and that seed may become a tree. Is it a tree that you can comfortably sit under it? Those are the kind of questions you must consistently ask yourself. Each day I sow seeds into people's life. I sow seeds into organizations. When this thing becomes a tree, can I sit under it? Will it provide the kind of shade that I require when the sun of life is scorching? So in this very organization with Standard Chartered, there was this lady. There were things, there was just so much to, every day HR, you set out with a different plan and then something comes up altogether. It's everyday drama. Be ready for it. If you want to work with people, be ready for your hair to go as gray as mine. This lady it was a case of being tossed around. It was near victimization, and a case of where an opportunity wasn't given for the expression of her capabilities fully. So by the time the case got to me, she had put in her resignation, and the process was automated. It wasn't done in Nigeria, but I then started to speak and to engage across the business. It was a tough one. I can't go into too much details, but the ultimate part of that whole drama, thank you, Victoria. The ultimate part of that whole drama, it was crazy. And I said, over my dead body, when you stand for integrity, let it be known. Will this happen? Even if it is one person, you may be writing the epitaph for that organization. So I went in and started to follow through, hold conversations, hold engagements. And I was told that this has never been reversed. And I said, this is the first time. There will always be a first time. I dare say today, she's one of the best that is adding value to that organization. That resignation from the same Singapore Shared Service Center it got to, it was reversed. It was the first ever. And she's giving value, exceedingly happy, and still there within the organization. Most of the people who victimized her are out, or whatever happened to them, but she's able to have an excellent career. Even if it is one person you are able to save, please do so. It will be written for you, and not just about you, but that person, you are enabling their career, because the role of HR is about the people and the organization, not necessarily about you. But the thing is, as you fulfill that purpose, don't worry, you get fulfilled at the end. The second part of it, there are many things that happened, shaking, moving, impact. But remember that I was talking to you that in the beginning, I had a boss also who was afraid about who I was becoming, and that you need to be perceptive about how you present things to your boss, and applying a lot of diplomacy and tact. I had this encounter. I had a boss who, at the time, even though it was apparent to everybody, was unduly harsh, was crazily, almost always screaming, and there was almost as if there was anything that ever did that was good enough. But the interesting thing also is the fact that all the initiatives that needed to drive the organization, all the projects that were being done, and I still have some of those mails till today as evidence, was done by me. And unfortunately, my boss would have to applaud. So out of 10 projects, I would handle about 8, and those 8 were significant. Out of about 16 CXOs, I was serving about 9 of them. I had relationships with them to the point that they would come to the floor to come look for me. My boss didn't like that, because my boss felt, what kind of relationship do you have with these people that they'll be looking for you? And I said, no, it's simply because I give them value. That much even irritated my boss more and more. So it was an unconscious, and some of you may find yourself in the state where your boss is more or less, it's like you're experiencing contention, and you were jealous, and your boss is sort of jealous of who you are. Manage the information. I remember I said that in the beginning that I'm a Christian. So I would remember that Isaac, each time he tried to open a new well, there was so much contention, but he also had to protect his family and protect his mind. What happened? Please practice tenacity. Stay focused and stay true. Keep your hands clean. Time, and the God you serve, whatever you believe in, will come and hold that battle for you. Eventually, my boss orchestrated my getting out of the system. So if anything, I had experienced a redundancy. I am not ashamed to talk about it, but you see, also there's the position of faith. I could not, at that time, I felt like suing the organization. I felt bad because I had awards. There were mails from this person stipulating, celebrating. In fact, I think I got 2 Spark cards. I got a bag gift. I got also from this person. So how do you then come back to say my role is redundant? And I had 2 dual reporting. I had at the group, and I had at the person at the local level. But also, here is my lesson. Never be bitter about anything. Bitterness eats you and kills you. Life goes on. choose joy. But when you choose joy, your world opens because everybody wants to embrace the joyful. The season of life you are going through, remember I talked about failure, that is an event. It doesn't define you. I had to approach that season as an event and that it doesn't define me. Every step that I thought in the HR space that I wanted to take, that I should have taken legally, faith, my God didn't allow it. God said, no, there's a purpose. And after that, I went back into consulting. I left gallantly. Most people didn't even understand what was going on. And then the people I was working with, all the different chiefs, they were mad when I work diligently till the end. Let nothing be found missing in what you're doing. So a week to my exit, I went to meet all of them and I said, is there anything you need me to do? Next week, I'm no longer here. They were in shock. Nobody could understand it. And I know 2, 3, 4 people, if I mention their names, they were ready to take it up legally, even on my behalf. And I said, no, please. The instruction to me is to live peaceably with all men. Understand your time and your season and the instruction your God gives you as you do your work. Never, ever neglect it. So I had these instructions and I stayed off with. However, that was what launched me into the next phase that I got into. And that has enabled me. Time and season has come to speak for me. Remember, I said that your work has a voice. It will speak. It spoke. It was too loud, but I am grateful to God. And the important thing at that time is when you are going through the seasons of life, you are being taught character. Go through the season, don't lose the lesson. Go through seasons of life, don't lose the lesson. It was essential because also I'm an HR practitioner. I can now identify the emotions of somebody who is experiencing an exit, whether forced or unforced. I can speak to experiences to lower level because also at that time, I wasn't as perfect as I thought. There was a character reshaping. And that character reshaping, it was essential for the future I was going into if it didn't happen at that time. So not all your seasons are bad or the devil is after you. It may be required for the person you are becoming. Remember what I went through in the beginning when I had all the network and the connection that could give me big job. Yet I was doing the test, I was passing. For some reason or the other, it was not explainable even to the people who were there. It wasn't happening. The same thing was this situation. So understand your pattern, understand your season, understand that there is character development that has to happen for you to be ready for the next shape that you're in. So I went into consulting back. So remember, I also said that no skill that you've had is lost. So I adjusted and I moved on, and here we are. In my consulting practice, I had many other offers. There were tons and one of them, but you know what? You must be discerning. You must be like men of Issachar who understood time and seasons. And so at that time, this was where I was led to, which is my current organization, which, by the way, when I joined this organization in Leadway, I was told that nobody has ever succeeded in this role. And so, in fact, they said that the last 2 people that were taken, or 3 people, they left within 3 months. So I was told that I'm not expected to last more than 3 to 6 months. This is my 8th year in that organization where significant strides have been achieved. And remember something I mentioned about culture. I'm coming back to come and speak about it. Now, organizations are evolving. They are becoming. But you must understand the temperature of the culture that works in the organization. So when I got into my organization that I am now, things have now significantly changed. But in the beginning, it was not so. It was not so. Also note this. You, as the HR person,
The temperature of your knowledge and your body and your courage influences that organization. And if you do not rev your temperature or rev your knowledge, the organization will be at the level where it is. Always remember that. So when I got in, everybody in management, except maybe for two persons, were people that were much older than me. It will be foolish of me to think that, one, it is an indigenous company that has grown significantly. I mean, it's now more than 50 years of age. One, it will be foolish of me not to recognize the cultural nuances. And remember, I said recognize it, respect it, and reconcile it, and not to recognize it and then walk into the room and immediately assume I can call everybody on first name basis. I have only laid down my own coffin and then nailed it. Do not do so. Understand the temperature, understand what it is being said and what is unsaid. 70% of what is unsaid is what is most vitally important for that organization. So I will go around the table and kneel down. Yes, because that was what was required at that time. Today, it is different because generations will come, generations will go. What will remain is what you will do. I realize that I'm out of time. I will stop there. I can't tell the entire story. I can only hope that I have enabled your thoughts and your mind. Please keep reinventing yourself. The knowledge you had 2 days ago, last week, is obsolete to today. And ask yourself critical questions. Where am I taking this organization and where is this organization going? How do I enable it? How do I enable that journey? Who are the critical players? And how do I navigate you need to create a stakeholder map and know the power of influence, the degree of influence and the degree of power. And ask yourself, how do I navigate this so that we all go in a direction that gives value to everybody? Think legacy each time you do things and ask yourself, what am I leaving behind? And what am I creating that will enable the future that ought to be?